Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about critiquing your own photos, and Pat and I had the pleasure of actually taking the training of out of the Florida Camera Club of Council suggests that we critique photos, and you may know that you could submit photos to the Florida Camera Club Council, and they will not only critique your photos on a quarterly basis, but I guess it's triannual, actually, not quarterly anymore. And they will give you a score, and we're going to review those criteria, which you could critique your own photos with. And Pat's going to run through those criteria. Then we're going to look at a few photos. So hopefully everybody can see our presentation here, and we'll get started.
Okay, is everybody here? I'm on.
You are.
Okay. Well, good evening and welcome all. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate seeing your beautiful and lovely faces. Chuck and I will show you some technical points of how to critique your photos. I know that lots of you would love to do that, especially before submitting them for competition. So why self-critique matters? Self-critique matters because you can look at your photos and go a long way in improving your photographic eye and photography skills. The F3C criteria help evaluate your images objectively, just like they do in the competitions. So for the FCCC, I'll say F3C. The FCCC is just too long. The F3C judging criteria is broken down into 3 segments with subheaders. The first segment is called the overall impact. And in that segment, there is a clear main subject that holds the viewer's interest. So you hold up your photo and you're looking at that photo and you want to see what's pulling you into that photo, and you do it over and over again.
Pat, we're going to go through each one of those. So
Okay.
why don't you just state that there's 3 criteria:
Okay.
overall impact, composition of elements, and technical excellence. And we're gonna unpack each one of those criteria but it's 3 fundamental categories that the
Yes, it's
F3.
overall. Yeah, it's
Yes.
overall impact, composition of elements, and technical excellence.
So here's the details of overall impact.
So overall impact, there is a clear main subject that holds the viewer's interest. The viewer returns to the subject again and again to make sure he's got the subject. The second item is visually compelling. This may feature an unusual subject and or have unique lighting, perhaps color, angle, or subject. The composition is well done. Evocative may evoke emotion. It sets a mood, and it also sets the stage to tell you a story. We go on to composition of elements. The first item in that is a well-composed image that has a clear and supported main subject, and it's presented in a cohesive and focused visual experience. Subject is thoughtfully placed in the frame. The key aspects of composition are: 1, supporting elements. These elements support the subject. They do not distract the subject. 2, background/setting is not distracting. You want to look at the backgrounds and around the subject. 3, color scheme. Colors work very well together. 4, placement in frame, position of subject, framing, and or cropping. Movement and patterns, dynamism, dimension, and 3D depth. Those are important. And the last of that is lighting, attention to the subject, depth, and visual interest. Okay. We move to technical excellence. The image is free from these possible technical issues. Item 1, the subject focus and clarity, which is noise, dust, and sensor spots, over-sharpening, loss of detail due to blur. Item 2, exposure, overexposed areas blown out, or underexposed areas very dark, right?
Shut the door.
Color balance, white balance with color cast suits the subject, or the oversaturation. Process and artifacts, halos, poorly done cloning, strong vignettes, crooked horizons, or structural lines. And that is the judging criteria.
Hey, Chuck, how do you feel about that Crooked Horizons bit there?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
So for mono, we have the impact, we have the composition and technical excellence, plus range of tones, texture, contrast, and light. And creative or interpretive, we have impact, composition, and technical excellence, plus convincing treatment, well blended, and imaginative. Documentary, impact, composition, and technical excellence. Plus, you have street photography where there's sports, fairs, animal, action shots, reenactments, events. The story is most important here in the documentary.
So what the F3C does is they have a scoring scheme, and they try to go through, there's 3 judges involved in when they make these scores, and then they average the scores. So, and they rely on what the judges think as to whether these criteria were only a few of them were met, or there were many of them met, or met most of all these criteria. And then they give ribbons. They kind of force the ribbons into 25% of the ribbons. 25% of the photos submitted are given ribbons. And the way they do that is blue ribbons are 5%, red ribbons are 5%, white ribbons are 5%, and then yellow ribbons are 10%. You could kind of think of yellow ribbons as honorable mentions, if you will. So you have blue, red, white, which is kind of relates to first, second, and third. And then yellow ribbons are kind of the honorable mentions. That's up to 10%. But they kind of look at all the photos. They try to score them. Each one of the judges scores them, and then they average those. So what I was going to do is take you to, let me take you to the, see if I can get it to it here. I'm going to take you to the website of the F3C, and I've already brought up these are all the images of the third triangle digital. So, here's an example of that was one of the highest scoring images in third triangle triannual digital competition. This is in 2024. The first triannual is in competition is
It's right now going on.
it's going on right now. So
Yeah.
this is what we have. And you can go to one of these, you can go to the website, you can look at galleries, and then you can search all of the scored, previously scored images, and you can kind of get a feel for what the judges are looking for. So let's look at this image. Hopefully everybody can see that. So here was a very high scoring image. And by the way, we offered a handout. We gave you a link, but if you went to the Camera Club website, you can go to resources, and then you can go to tutorials and articles, and you will find a handout there that, goes through where you can check off on your own images. You could use this handout, which is what Pat went over. But, here, think for yourself, from this image, what's the overall impact? What is the composition of elements? And, do we have technical excellence here? Certainly, it appears to me anyway. But you can go through some of these images and you can look at, those criteria we just went over, um, in terms of overall impact. This is a pretty impactful photo, at least was for me, with this guy working metal, evidently. Certainly, the composition looks great to me. And then let's compare that to, some of the lower scoring images. As we said, let me go back. You have the blue ribbons, you have the red ribbons, you have the yellow, white ribbons, then you have yellow ribbons, which are kind of the honorable mentions. But let's look at some of the lower scoring images, and you can kind of compare, what, why some of the judges, might pick some of these things. All the way down at the bottom here, let's look at this red-winged blackbird, for instance. One of the first things you see, it's not exactly in focus, which would certainly, would suggest that it's not very high scoring because of the technical excellence is not there. When it comes to the overall impact, if for those of you that I'm sure have more expertise than at least I do on nature photography, that the bird's not doing anything exceptional at all, so the overall impact may be a lot lower in this. I'm not sure about the composition either, in terms of the what you might see. So you can see it was scored very low, 1033, in which only it met very few criteria. A couple of things I wanted to show you on this page. Let me see if I can find it. I'm looking for a frog here. 15. Let's look at two images that are very similar. I'll find it in just a minute. I know I will. There it is. So look at this frog here. This was scored. This is a yellow ribbon, so you could see it was kind of a
15.47.
yeah. It's an honorable mention.
Yeah.
You can see it. The background is certainly not, any way stepping on the image at all. You've got a clearly defined subject. The image is in crystal clear. I mean, really point on focus. And, I may argue there's not enough room in the left-hand side of this frog, but, so be it. It's a great image of a frog. Now let me compare that to another image of a frog that got scored a lot
Higher.
lower.
Oh, lower.
Yeah, 11.67. I'll find it here in a minute. One momento. Here it is. Notice this image of a frog. It doesn't exactly fill the frame. The
In the background.
background is a lot more busy,
Turn it,
although it is out of focus, which is
turn
great,
it.
but it's a lot more busy. And at least in my view, I'm not sure it's 11.67, but on the other hand, you know, I'm not sure why it would be a vertical image,
Yep,
or if
horizontal.
it's a vertical image, why it's cropped the way it's cropped. You'd think it would be, more focused with the frog being larger in the frame,
Right.
in my mind. So those are some of the things we can learn by
Background is
looking at the
this
different images
background.
here. One of the things I wanted to show you, I'm looking for another image that I've looked at that is a 12.0. Bear with me if you would. So here's a harvest moon. It was scored fairly low, a 12. You can see, there's a lot of dark area in the image. I'm not sure why the moon is so far over to the left. The horizon's kind of right in the middle. There's not a great deal of reflection. So there's not, in my mind, there's not a lot of impact in this particular image. And, I think that's why it got scored so low, but also the composition is probably more centered than it needs to be. And it might be even a little out of focus in terms of some of those background images. So let's look at one more that's scored low. We might learn something from 12.33. Take a look at this image. Gordy, what do you see here?
Well, I'm falling off the right side myself.
Falling off the right side. So, um, one of the criteria here is that we have, we may feature an unusual subject or in an unusual way. It's framed nicely in there, and then you have that horizon that is, obviously falling off. Um, that is a distraction in the image, so it got scored low. But there's, the main subject here, I would guess the judges are going to question what is it? It's probably that the idea of the photographer was probably the boat,
The
but
boat and the pier, the pilings or whatever you want to call it.
yeah, but it's
That lines.
so far away and it's dead center, and then I don't know why they scored it 12.33, but there's probably a lot not going on with this image that as compared to the others. And remember, all this is they're comparing. Once they score all these things, they've got to decide what the top 25% is, and so there may be some adjustments that take place as time goes on. But one of the big things here, if you've got some distractions that distract the judges, like the horizon not straight, they're probably gonna say something about that. So let's go back, if you will, to the. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the presentation, if you will. So let's look at this image. You be the judge. let's see, let's start with overall impact. What do you think? Don't everybody speak at once.
My eye gets confused. I'm looking at the shells, but then I go up and I see that crooked
Mhm.
horizon leading up to the two people.
You know, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Um, you're trying to tell a story here, and
Mhm.
it does do that. It shells, the idea of the composition is good, but it's messy. You have to be
Mhm.
very careful when you have a foreground that foreground is very distracting. Why? Because of all the seaweed and junk. It's not pretty. And I love the idea of what he did. I like the fact you've got a couple of couples back there walking the beach. The horizon's a little off whack. You know, that's like being half pregnant. You can't be that. You've got to either go all the way and tilt it, or it's got to be right on. I think the idea is here. I actually like the photo. If you take your hand and cover the whole bottom third,
Yep, yep,
and now you've got
That's
a
the photo.
panorama with
Yeah.
cleaner lines. All the
yep.
foreground,
Panorama.
yeah, that's what I would do with it.
Yep.
What about technical excellence?
Well, I don't like the fact that the people are out of focus either.
Right.
That's kind of bothersome. The colors are pretty.
I think that the people should have been closer in too, because I think their expression would have like added a lot to the storytelling.
Correct.
Could be.
What is the point? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. What was the point of taking the photo? Was the point the people and a little bit of the background or the foreground, or was it the foreground? So what was the point? I agree with your comment there. A
Point
little
is the
bit
shells.
closer and in focus of the people.
The point is the shells.
Point
I
of the
think
shot.
I think the people are always the most interesting part, honestly.
Mhm.
Like they just sort of enhance the environment around them. Um, that's my opinion.
In my opinion, I think I'd like to see this photo with them really out of focus quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Just a ghost of them there and
Right.
let those seagulls tell the story. I think
Mhm.
Exactly. I,
I,
I feel the same way too, but I could be wrong.
this isn't about people in this case. This is about the landscape that they're in.
Mhm.
Shells, the colors,
Yeah.
Shoot it.
There's
texture.
scale involved here.
Mhm.
Some other thing. That to me, I would make it a panorama and have those people just
Oh,
very, and you can do that just with your aperture. That
Right.
was definitely an f2
Wide,
point.
wide aperture.
Yeah,
Right.
2.8, 3.5.
Right.
Well, I showed you this photo and get you the comments for a purpose. This happens to be my photo. It
I
got a
know it
blue,
was.
it got a blue ribbon.
Oh my gosh.
It was scored in 1818.
Okay, Chuck.
What's that?
I
that's
said,
a
okay, good for
score.
you.
That's a good
So I
score.
just want to make a point here about competitions. I could agree or disagree with
Right.
everything that people said about how they hated the photo. But here we had three judges that scored it an 18, which, I got a blue ribbon on it from the F3C. In my opinion, it's not one of my best photos.
Mhm.
But I really wanted to make a point here about sometimes we get hung up on what judges say, and you really need to evaluate your own photos, based on your criteria and what your goal was. My goal on the photo was to show the shells and put people out of focus in the background. Maybe I didn't put that enough. I think from a color perspective, it's not balanced like I would do today. I did this in 2014, but nevertheless, it was scored very high by the F3C.
Chuck, do you agree with the comments that were made?
Some of them, yeah. But, you know, like all judges, I don't agree with a lot of comments made by judges, so.
Chuck, are you going to go, I don't know what your program is, but are you going to go back to the F3C?
I can do that. Let us go through one more thing here.
Yep.
Here's one more photo. What do you think about this photo?
I like,
Gorgeous.
Like it.
I like it. It's
That's
just,
an 18.
Yeah. Gorgeous.
it gives you
can't-
a
I don't
sense
see
of,
anything wrong with that one at all.
no, it gives you a sense of humility, of,
Mhm.
you know, of serenity around you. It
Don't
just,
tell me that was a 10 or 11.
Well, let's go through the criteria. I mean, that's what we're here for. Overall impact, what do you think?
Yeah.
very, it tells a story.
Mhm.
And the composition of elements, what, you know,
You have
there's
a clear subject, that's for sure.
clear
You've
subject.
got tremendous amount of 3D in there, let's say, foreground,
Yeah, you've
middle
got
ground, and background.
mountains. Yeah.
Extraordinary lighting. It,
Yep.
it makes a lot of
Shadow.
ticks.
Got great shadow detail.
Mm.
The
lights aren't
technical
low.
excellence, you see any distractions or anything?
I think the elements blend very well.
I have a question.
Okay.
And I'm looking at, I mean, I'm not commenting on a photo, but something like this, I would stress out over the foliage, being in focus, or in this case, I'm not sure if it's out of focus or this is just the way it looks when you're looking at it, but that's something that, right or wrong, it would bother me.
And what bothers you are, Jim?
Looking at the foliage,
Where? Which foliage?
Grass you're talking about.
right up in
Trees?
the extreme foreground, right behind the tree. To me, that looks out of focus.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah, well, that's my question.
Yeah.
It looks in
is
focus
that the
to
way
me.
it's supposed to look?
Well, it's not the subject, right?
No, it's not.
Actually, Gene, if you look at the foreground, which is in focus, and the background all the way to infinity is pretty much in focus,
Mhm.
that would automatically make those grasses, which you're talking about, that field, that's actually in focus. It's just the fact that
There's a
you're
lot of
looking at it at an angle that just
Mhm.
blends them all together.
Well, you see that? Yeah, you see that's my question. All right, so you answered it. Good.
Yeah. Even the houses in the background at the foothills of the mountains are sharp. So
Mhm.
So this happens to also be my photo. And
Is that a
14.
14?
it
Oh
was
my.
only scored a 14.
Oh my gosh.
So I wanted you to see, this is one of my favorite photos.
Mhm.
I actually pulled the car over when I saw this. This is in Fussen, Germany. I just had to get this church in this frame of this tree. And, I love this photo. I thought sure it would be highly scored, get some sort of ribbon, at least top 25%, right? It was not. No ribbon, 14. So again, my point is you got to take some of these competitions to some degree about what do you like in a photograph. To me, this was perfectly framed in a I loved using secondary frames, and you've got this tree with a secondary frame,
Yep.
Right.
and because of the shadow in the foreground, it is just perfectly framed. Yet,
It's
in
like
my
a
opinion, I got a feeling the judge, found that as a distracting, so, judges will, kind of convey their own feelings about things. And, which is the point of this tutorial is use this criteria to kind of check off your own list of what you think things are. And certainly put photos into competitions, but don't stress out about the fact that you may find, differing judges saying differing things.
Chuck, let me ask you something. Do you remember what was on the right side away from this tree? Was approaching this at a different angle?
Yeah, I've took several pictures here, but I was driving down the road. This is in Fussen, Germany. I was down the road and I saw this framed, and this was the photo that I wanted to take.
Huh.
And I guess that's my point in some of these competitions. It's really, to a large degree, it's you have an audience of one. What do you like in a photograph? This is one of my favorite photos, and I was quite surprised it wasn't scored any higher than it was. But I showed you two photos with one that was scored very high, which is, not necessarily
I
my
think
favorite photo. I showed you a very favorite photo that was scored low. And my whole proposal, whether you accept it or not, is, really it's an audience of one about what you like on your own photography.
Sure.
Could
It's a
I,
gorgeous photo.
Chuck, could I expound on that a little bit with a little bit of history with the CCB? We had a, a speaker that came from England to Florida, and we happened to snag him for one of our program meetings. And he told a story where in England, he entered a photo into a contest. It was called FIAP, FIAP, I believe. And there was 20,000 photos entered in this contest, and he won the gold medal of that contest. Quite prestigious. He took the same photo a little later, entered it in a small contest of maybe 100 photos, and it did nothing.
Yeah. That's my point. It's highly variable, is what my point is. So we're going to go back. John, you wanted to go back to the actual
I do. Could you go back to the blacksmith?
to the what?
The
blacksmith.
Blacksmith. Hang on one
That was a
second. It's going
powerful
to take me
photo.
a minute to get there.
Yep, thank you, and I appreciate it. I made a note when I saw that.
I like that photo too.
The blacksmith.
All right. So uh, to right to your point, Chuck and Pat, I can't, this photo is boring to me. Could you think of a more boring point of view than the one that's being shown? The colors all over the place. And, if you're talking about firing up something in a blacksmith shop, and all I see is a guy, I don't get it.
Mhm.
To me, that's not an 18. That's the 14. And that frog that you showed before, that was definitely up, should have been up there. But that's only my opinion. I'm just saying that I have a way different view. If I'm in this blacksmith shop, I'm not standing holding my camera at that height and shooting that photo.
Mhm.
I'm going to go behind that fire and look up at him with that hand reaching out, with the smoke partially in his face, and, make it a monochrome or do something. But this is the thing just makes me yawn to death. I can't believe,
I agreed. I think that's an incredibly unimaginative photo. Like
yes.
it just has nothing, the colors are bad.
Mhm.
I mean, even the action of the fire, you could sort of have captured that a little bit better.
And he's disengaged, really. I'd rather him looking at me or something.
Yeah, I think it's boring.
But it might have been a posed photo, and that's why it's so boring. It wasn't like he wasn't it's not an action shot. He's just like stoking the coals there.
But there's so many elements there to photograph
Yeah.
and use as a point of focus, and all I'm getting is the highlight on his right arm.
Yeah.
I think the reason it was scored high is because it technically, from a lighting point of view, subject point of view, it's all there. But I agree with you, John. I don't think there's any impact here, right? I mean, let me show you a photo that.
One quick
So,
question, one quick thing back out there, just real quick. And it's a trick that I use all the time. Everyone, just take a look at that photo. Now squint your eyes at it.
Mhm.
where's the highlight? It's the fire in his arm.
Yeah.
And that's a good trick, looking at your own work, is to squint your eyes and see where the light is. See what
Mhm.
pops out first. And that can kind of guide you along the way. Okay, Chuck, sorry, and I'll shut up now.
No, that's all right. Look at this photo here. Now, to me, this has a lot of impact, right? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, how did they get I mean, they got the wasp in there as well. I'm not much for nature photography, but, I can understand the score of this one. I could certainly say this might be 17, but I agree with you on the other one that doesn't, I think this is a higher scoring photo than,
But this is more action too. He's got his big mouth open there and
by the
screaming.
way, I wanted to say that the Florida Camera Club Council over the years have gotten a lot of feedback that they're too biased towards animals. And I think they finally got it. And so the color category has now been split into animals and color. So if you were to submit your photo in this quarter, the color category is not animals. And I think that was one of the best things they've done because I always thought they were way biased towards animals, especially birds. I mean, it seems like, if you looked at the top 25% that they would give ribbons to, 20% seemed to be animals and birds. So I'm thankful that they have changed the rules. So all the animals will get judged together, and then all other color photos will get judged together.
Hey, Chuck, I've got a question for you when you got a minute.
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure I can answer it, but ask the question.
My question, and this maybe is a little off topic because we're talking about self-evaluation of our photos before we submit them. Um, how would we, or where would you put the compliance with, or how does the photo support the topic? Because as you know, our camera club has a topic or a theme every month. And I have seen a few where ones that have scored well and done high, I grapple with how does that come close to supporting the theme, or vice versa. Some really fabulous pictures that had no connection to the theme whatsoever. So how does that fit in here, or do you even worry about that?
Well, you don't fit in that with the F3C, which was our discussion, but we've always left it up to, I mean, traditionally we've left it up to the judge to make that judgment call whether it fits into the theme or not. I agree with you, Gordy. It's like we said here, I showed you two photos of mine, one which is scored very high, which I wouldn't score myself very high, and one that was scored very low or somewhat low that I would score very high. So it's kind of the same thing with a theme, right? I mean, we're all maybe have different opinions. I think some of our judges kind of overlook, the theme. And it might be that they think that everything presented in front of them, they're not scoring on that thing, on that criteria. And so we probably ought to take a better approach that we're expecting you to make a judgment on the theme. Now, we all are supposedly artists, and sometimes you can take an artistic approach of what the theme is. Like, I remember we had a theme called emotion. Now, what is really emotion? That's so subjective that it might be hard. You might have a different opinion of what it fits the theme. When it comes to something like we just had, which was, well, what was it? The early days or something like that. It was supposed to be
The
from
good old days.
the good old days, right? I mean, when you have very modern things in the background, in the good old days, to me, that's not good old days, but our judges seem to think that, it met the criteria, but what are you going to do? I mean, it's
Could
a
have
judge's
overlooked
opinion.
that too.
So, I don't know, that didn't answer your question, but we've left it up. I mean, the point is we've left it up to the judges to make a determination of whether it meets the theme or not.
Hey, Chuck, um, we've always been very kind of accepting of people's interpretation of what our themes are. And as far as the good old days, when people talk or show images of the good old days, you have to ask yourself, what are the good old days? I mean, is it an old shack in the weeds? I'm not so sure that that's a good old day for anybody, but to the point of like Isabel's, the girl swinging on the thing, that reminds people of the good old days. And in my
That was
opinion,
Marcia's, yeah.
or Marcia.
Yeah.
And so if we do a broad interpretation or give people leeway on their interpretation instead of being literal, I think that's the way we've always kind of handled it because we're not a heavily competitive kind of club.
And by the way, I think that's the right way to do it. I mean, the judge can make some interpretations
Yeah.
about that. I mean, after all, we're looking for great photos as, whether it absolutely meets the theme or not. That would be, I would continue to leave it up to the judge instead of trying to put, some sort of,
Yeah.
In addition, the whole reason we have our monthly competitions is to promote getting out there and taking photos on a monthly basis. We all can't be Lisa Bonner and Isabel who go out there about every 15 minutes and shoot something.
Stuart Landman, too.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, point was well made. You have to take judging with a grain of salt and accept they're always going to be different. We could put 10 judges in the room and there'd be 10 different winners. So just take it for what it is. We're out there shooting away and we're trying to do the best we can. And those are our best efforts. And, I think it's good to talk about them.
And if you really believe in a photo, I mean, that you like, and let's say whether it's the Camera Club or Brevard competition or another competition, submit it again, submit it to either the Camera Club or wherever. Even the F3C, the F3C will allow you to resubmit it if it didn't win a ribbon. So, remember there's three judges that they average the score, and chances are there'll be three different judges the next time you submit it. So, if you really believe in the image, which I've done a couple of three times now, where I really believed in the image, and I've told this story before, I really believed in the image, and it got nowhere in our own Camera Club competitions. And then I submitted it to the APC, and it got a special award. It's if
So,
you really
Chuck,
if
I
you
have
really
one
believe in the
question.
image, go for it. So
I have one question for you, Chuck. So with the church in Germany
yeah,
that you did, that nice photo, how does it make you feel that that scored a lower grade than, the other one? I mean, did it change your point of view?
no, I mean it doesn't now. It did. I tell you, when I was more in a development mode, maybe remember some of these images I'm showing you were 2014, 2012. I've probably been more of a serious photographer since 2009, thereabouts, where I was learning more and more about what I was doing. But today, when I get an image back, like I just submitted an image, a couple of images to the Camera Club, it didn't go anywhere. I still believe in the image and I will submit it again.
Right. Yeah, I
Right?
noticed
Because,
that. Yeah,
you
you
know,
believe
I,
in it,
I hate to
right?
say this, but you got to really be a champion of your own images if you really believe in it. And so take some of the criteria we've talked about here, which are important, and does it meet that criteria? And if it meets that criteria or any other criteria you can find on the internet or that kind of thing, and you really like the image, then you may want to submit it again. That's my point.
Yeah. Yeah, you might come along different set of judges.
Yeah, you always will, right? I mean, we don't have the same judges every month,
Right.
right? So,
Chuck, do you think that if you had flipped that picture around right to left, it might have gone differently?
I have seen F3C judges. And I think Richard, back when he was president, we hosted a F3C judging of prints. And I attended that. And I observed judges that argued about two things, which I think is really ridiculous. One of them was whether the photo was reading from left to right or right to left. In my view, that's far less important, far less important compared to the three criteria we reviewed tonight. And the other one was they had an argument about what the rule of thirds focus point was. Was on the wrong point, the wrong, what do you call those points? The wrong
Intersect.
critical
I think they
point.
called them PowerPoints.
PowerPoints. Thank you, Richard. It was on the wrong PowerPoint. I'm thinking, come on, if you're worried about the PowerPoint on the rule of thirds, you're looking at the wrong thing, in my opinion. But again, I'm no expert. I'm just giving you my view about what you ought to be focused on. I think you ought to be focused on more of the criteria we reviewed tonight and less about things like PowerPoints and whether the image reads left to right or not and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
I'm I'm a humanist, I would say. That's my personality. I'm interested in culture and cultural moments, and I think something cultural can happen like anywhere. And that's sort of like what I I mean, I'm a complete novice. Like, I do not have any experience. I do not know what I'm doing at all. But if I were trying to compose a picture, I would be looking for something like that. Like, I remember I went to like a Trump rally one time, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a real interesting like electricity going on here between like different groups of people. And I'm like, wow, that has a lot of potential. Or maybe just anything sort of explosive going on, I think is interesting. Um, I'm going to a wedding even in the Middle East, which I think is like an interesting experience. Um, so I think like, when you're taking pictures of women in the Middle East, it's very difficult to have that point of view behind the scenes. And sometimes it's even hard to take a picture at all. So, I mean, I'm just look for these little things. Um, I'm hoping to capture that in the future.
Krista, are you responsible for taking photos at the wedding, or are you just an attendee?
I'm actually going to like two weddings, and these are like huge, like cultural things. Like there may be 1,000 people there, and there's like different like little ceremonies that they have, like a henna party where they put mud on top of their heads and flowers and dance around in the Palestinian dresses. And then there's like Russian immigrants into Jordan, so they have like a different cultural tradition, which I probably won't go to that. And then there's a lot of modernity mixing with the actual sort of ancient traditions in the Palestinian culture, which I think is really fascinating as well. And then you have the aspect of like the war somewhat being stopped. So there's like the war versus the celebration going on. So I think like those little aspects of it would be like super cool if I we're able to just focus in. I've never been able to do that before when I've gone to the Middle East previously because I have had my children and no time and no camera. So this is a good place to practice for me.
I would say as a person who's photographed a lot overseas, you make sure that in those kind of potentially difficult situations, not only as a celebration, but also culturally, just make sure you have advanced permission to freely photograph because, and just talk to the right people, then just turn yourself loose. But, don't just go in there and start firing away.
I mean, I'm super sensitive to that, and that's probably why I haven't had very many pictures, but I'm thinking of being a little bit more aggressive about that this time, especially because I have the trust. I have a lot of trust from my family after being, in the family 30 years. I might be able to like push things a little bit more and just capture something
Well,
that's,
good luck.
yeah, I'm hoping.
We have finished our presentation. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, Chuck, I have one for you. Back to that
For
church.
me, wait a minute. You're the one
I
presenting.
know, but I love that picture. So back to that church. If you had a person exiting that church or coming down the stairway or coming down the walkway, would that have made a difference in scoring to your photo?
I don't think so because the person would have been so far away, right? I mean,
Yeah, let's say you might have moved up a little closer, or
what I
if you were
liked
with
was
somebody, have her walk up to the church or
what I liked, and I will admit I have a bias towards is the secondary frame. When I was driving down the road, I saw that church behind that tree, and I literally pulled the rental car over and got out and took several frames with the church framed by that tree. And I noticed I mean, I didn't notice it when I first pulled over, but later, I mean, as I was starting to take the picture, I noticed the shadow on the below, so, the shadow, the tree branches perfectly framed the beautiful church, which, you don't see a
yeah.
church like that
I was just
every
wondering
day.
about that. Yeah,
But
you don't,
a
especially
small, remember, size matters when it comes to subjects. So one person coming out of
would have
that,
been a little tiny, tiny person.
yeah,
Okay.
it certainly would have given it
Yeah.
scale, right? But
Yeah.
I'm not sure it would have made a difference to the judges. I'm convinced, and I don't know for a fact, but I'm convinced that they found the frame distracting. That's my guess as to why they scored it so low, but I don't know. So,
Chuck, this is John. I have a question about that church photo also.
well, let me
Just
put
to,
it up. Go
just to
ahead.
prolong this thing. Okay.
What's that?
Just to prolong our conversation, but my question is, where the heck did everyone park?
Yeah. Well,
I happen to think this must be a ceremonial chapel or,
yeah, I think it might have been, though it wasn't on a Sunday. And I don't know if I don't even know if this church is, a church that celebrates or worships on Sunday, but I don't even remember what day it was, but, there wasn't anybody around. So,
now Chuck, the other thing, the F3Cs, they label, all of their photos are titled, aren't they?
Yes, they
yes.
are.
Okay, so that gives credence to the fact that we're asking for titles now. I like that. How are we going to use the information that you presented to us tonight for future judging situations? Maybe it's for when we judge, our own people judge, we just have a printout of that available for everyone, or Pat, you may already have that.
Well, we've got a handout that's on the website, and there were links established to that, and you can get that. But I think Pat has a separate handout that has very similar criteria as to what we're judging.
Yeah, I have a couple of
I guess
They're almost the same. Might be a couple words, different, but
my
basically
question would be that should we have a standardized testing protocol so that when we have guest judges judge, it's not just their personal feelings without any other criteria, but what if we say this is our criteria for judging our contest, and these are the things you look for. In other words, all of the judging is consistent across all of our competitions.
Well, I think we have that, John. We probably ought to, I mean, every year we review it and we probably ought to review it again, but I think there's a document that Pat has, I think it
yeah,
was,
there's a list that goes to them and tell them the criteria of judging.
so, but why don't you
They're
publish it back
I
to,
don't know if they read it. That's another story.
yeah, why don't you publish it back to info, Pat, and we can take another look at it, but I think it originated by
We can probably
Richard, and
switch
then
things
I
around.
put some windage in it somewhere along the way, and then Pat has looked at it and maybe changed it, but
I think that
we've got a list.
no matter, well, whether we have the information, once we have the information, I think no matter who judges, whether they're outside speakers coming in or whoever, we should hand them that information by email or wherever, so they know when they look at our digital work that this is what we judge by. Otherwise, we can't rely on them going to our website.
No,
looking
no,
for-
no. I
No,
think,
they don't. They do. Like I said, they do get something on how to judge our photos. If they read it or if they study it, that's another question.
Yeah, okay.
Pat, if it's the document that I sent you, from what I remember, the very first
Aye.
item is, does the photo meet the contest theme? That's the very first one. We
Exactly.
talked at length about that, but that's the very first item.
And so Pat, you're telling me that the judges already get a document of some kind?
Yeah, they get a document on how to judge and what we're looking for. And that's sent prior to the actual competition so that they can study it. I give them enough time to do, think about it.
All right. Yeah, makes sense.
So I have a question. I'm curious to know how many people on here have actually been a judge for for whether it's our club or some other club. And if so,
Raise your hands. I think you're all pretty much visible. Timothy, have you been a judge before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Glenn,
Looks like 4.
Carlos? Pam?
Right. No, I haven't. I haven't.
Okay, and
so
Pam,
anyway,
Denise?
for those that have, I guess my question is, and Chuck kind of said, well, he's not really into, or not, I don't want to say this negatively, but he's not a wildlife photographer, right? So when you're judging something and you've got the wildlife versus maybe your street photography versus, and maybe your passion is one way, do you find it difficult to judge them all equally? Like, do you
I don't
tend
think
to lean towards one particular
I don't think I find it
bias?
difficult because you can figure out, just look at these three criteria: overall impact, composition of elements, technical excellence. I showed you the bird photograph photo that I really like. I think it really scores high in all of those. It's overall impact. You really want to look at that subject, and I mean, compare that to the blackbird we saw, right? I mean, anytime I was judging that, the blackbird would be very low scoring, but the owl that you saw would be very high scoring because the
There's a
overall
lot of contrast
impact,
there too in that bird. It's not just the blackbird, right?
the technical excellence, that kind of thing. And then I've been trained before with very good wildlife people that a good wildlife photo is usually is judged very high if the animal is doing something very unique, like eating, rather than just sitting there, right? So I know better, even though I'm not a wildlife photographer, I know better that if the animal is actually throwing a piece of bait in it up in the air in its mouth, or one of the things that John and I and Richard judged down in Indian River Photo Club, which I remember, there was an osprey that had dived down and he had 3 fish in his claws. I mean,
Wow.
that is a compelling
That's amazing.
image, right? Because it's so unique. And
Mhm.
so I know enough about those sort of things that I think I can judge them, accurately, at least in my view. But the whole point of some of the 2 images I showed of mine there, it's still my opinion when I judge something like that. And I think it's more important, when I've done tag team at least, and John and Richard and I have done Indian River Photo Club a number of times. It's really better to have, someone will say something and you'll say, but John, did you see this over here? Or John, does that, or Chuck, this is, look at this over here. And then we come to a consensus. It's far better judging going on than if you have one person's opinion.
I agree.
I
Well,
found
for
that-
APC, we always have 3 judges, which is,
Yeah.
get those results there most of
Or
the,
2.
or 2 if one die.
No, I've always asked 3. Don't always get them. It's hard.
Yeah.
John, when you were at the rodeo, you took this wonderful shot of the a sheep. Like there was some child on a sheep and it was moving.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you get a chance, can you like teach me how to do that? Because I keep thinking, oh, what if I'm at a wedding and people are moving and twirling, and that could be so cool.
It's interesting. Krista, that was the first photograph I took was a 4-year-old on the back of a sheep.
I
And
love it.
I knew I wanted to shoot motion, so I had it at about a 20th of a second. And I got down to the level of the dirt, and that
Mm-hmm.
kid came out of there, and it was blurred. And then the second shot, the kid was underneath the sheep.
Mm-hmm.
That was the end of the story. That's about a second and a half. But if you shoot as fast as you can, you're going to get some of those kind of things.
So a 20 of a second would
Yeah,
be,
anytime you get motion, it's anywhere from about a 10th of a second to a 60th of a second, depending on if you're panning or shooting motion. We can talk about that.
I would just need to practice,
Yeah.
find something moving and just click a few things and see what happens.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of that kind of falls into the category of spray and pray. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression, but the spray part is when you hold the shutter down and it goes, and then pray is that one of them turns out okay.
Turns out okay, yeah.
And that, I mean, things were happening so fast. All I saw were just like legs and arms, and it was like things were knotted together. But it was a good
Since,
place
yeah,
to
I mean,
go
we
practice.
can keep talking, but I'm gonna stop the recordings for others here.
Yeah.
Any other